Thank you so much, Kayla, for joining me. Kayla works with an architecture studio called Bold. Tell us a bit about yourself, Kayla, and the work that you're doing here in the city.
So my name is Kayla, like you said, and I'm working on middle housing, single family housing, and some commercial spaces within the city. I'm an architect, but I'm also self-developing my own property, and I have previously as well. It's just that this one is quite a lot more ambitious and more challenging. So my first project that I self-developed was a single family home with a laneway, and this one is 16 units. This next one is 16 units.
Cool. Tell us a bit about your journey. I know we find ourselves in the historic neighborhood of Inglewood, which we both are residents of. We love the community, love the main street, but tell us how you got into architecture and a bit about yourself.
So I got into architecture at a failed attempt at business school.
Fair?
Yeah. I don't know. I thought I would really like business school. My parents are entrepreneurs. Lots of my mom's siblings are entrepreneurs. My grandpa's an entrepreneur. I'm like, okay, I'll go to business school. It's terrible. I really hated it. So my grandma's an artist, and I think probably I would prefer to be an artist. She's like, that's crazy. Like, you should do an applied art. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to do it. So I'm going to go to architecture school, getting a little bit back to my roots of the artistic sort of upbringing and doing art growing up. And I went to architecture school after business school, was just in business school for 2 years. I went to U of M. I really enjoyed it, and then I took 3 years off, and then I went into my master's in Sydney and then came back to Calgary, and I worked for a number of different firms. I worked at firms that worked in the commercial area of architecture, interior design, single family, multifamily, urban scale, and then I founded my own firm, Bold Workshop Architecture, in 2019.
Cool.
Yeah.
And what kind of stuff have you been focused on with Bold?
We do a lot of residential, whether it's single family, multifamily, mixed use, and then we do still do some commercial interiors. And we will take on anything except for institutional, but a lot of the time when people approach us, they're like, we have this really weird site and we thought of you. Or we have this unconventional fill in the blank and we thought of you. Because we're very interested in creative solutions. I hate to say thinking outside the box, but just doing things a little bit differently and taking the time to sink our teeth into innovative solutions, atypical solutions. Those kinds of things really excite us. They keep us open, they keep us on our toes, and they just really, they really excite us.
Yeah, I've been a fan of your studio since you started it, and I think what's always been exciting for me is, like, one, that you're in the residential field. I feel like housing is such a critical function for how we live.
Innovate,
and it's so important, and I think we lose innovation a lot of times, particularly in the gentle scale and the smaller scale. We see innovation in single family homes because there often is a budget to find it. You and I were talking off camera about, like, how do we still find ways to create creative architecture within this incredibly complex but beautiful scale of, like, middle housing. And so you talked about your first laneway journey. Unpack that one for us, because, like, everyone loves this idea of ADUs and laneways, but I think a lot of folks don't realize what goes into those.
So my first laneway project, and it was actually pretty new in the city at the time as well. So I think what's critical and what people don't understand is when you're building a laneway, it's really great to do it with the single family house because you cannot run your services, and this is getting really technical, but I think the audience will really appreciate it. You cannot run the services in your setbacks, people. Okay, so you can't do that. You have to run them through your house.
Yeah.
And so if you have an existing home and you're adding a laneway back and you're mid-block, which is the majority of lots, you have to run the services. You have to dig out the foundation on the front and the back of your house, and then you have to run the services through the house. Or you know, maybe you're one of those people, fortunately, where it's like in a spot where you don't have to do a renovation in the basement, but it's probably unlikely. And then you run them back to the laneway, and then you run them back to the front. And it creates a wall. It can create a wall, like in our house. It had a wall that was, this thick, like really, really, really thick.
Because you're running all the services.
Exactly. You run the services through the house.
And so you've obviously started to look at different housing forms as well through that experience of yours. And so before we get into more project details, tell us a bit about that, like the 99 problem stuff that you've been working on and socializing this idea about housing.
Basically, it stemmed out of this idea that we've got the public sector who's declared an emergency, a housing crisis, all levels of government. And then we've got the private sector who knows how to build, and they know how to build fast. And so we were wanting to explore this idea. We call it market-driven affordable housing. It's where the public sector in some sort of way or capacity would partner with or incentivize or provide some sort of like nugget to the private sector to provide affordable housing in projects. And there is this very real stigma that developers are always, you know, in it for themselves, always trying to make a lot of money, blah, blah, blah. I get it, but there's also a pile of risk associated with building a project. And for every successful developer, there's hundreds of failed behind them. We started with just exploring this idea at different scales. So what does that look like at an invisible density scale, gentle, discernible, and then intense? And we just had 3 different scales that we explored, like what could be some sort of mechanisms you could employ at each of these scales that could incentivize or provide partnership opportunities between the two.
I feel like your firm is always like on the cusp of innovation, pushing the boundaries, and I think you were probably early. I think more cities across the country are looking at different
mechanisms like that
now, but I think you were probably early. But even in your practice, I find that you're always pushing, like you talked about, you know, us as a developer to set the way. I think that's something that not everybody is doing. How have you found success in pushing the needle or moving the dial within your firm?
I guess it's how you define success. I was actually talking about this the other day with my partner. He asked me, and my response is like, how do you define success? We're very different. And I said, you know, I think magnitude of scale of positive impact is how I would define success. It's not about how much money you make, even though we're developing. It's not about how much money you make. It's scale, sort of measurable scale of positive impact. But I wouldn't say we've reached any sort of critical scale here.
How do we do better? Like I never understand how to make architecture more accessible to folks so that we don't get those bad actors. Because I find that I don't think they mean to be bad actors. I just don't think that we've created enough frameworks to get the products that we need that folks would celebrate, is my thoughts.
Yeah, I also think, and this is something that was important with 99 Problems, which we presented at the Open Concepts lecture series, is I think there's a real sort of lack of awareness and education about design and like what good design is and like how it can sort of elevate your life and how it can contribute to like a positive community. And there's not enough, I don't think, of those conversations. So I think there's a real critical education component, and you're trying to do it at Middle, and I'm trying to do it with what I'm doing, and we're trying to do it with Open Concepts. And you know, those are accessible, like Middle's accessible. Open Concepts, it costs $10 to go.
And let's talk about Architecture Soup. Tell me a bit about what this is.
Okay, so Architecture Soup is a character preservation design tool that we developed for this project, which is in an established community. And so all architects do a context study, or all good architects do a context study when they start out a project. And so our context is the street that we live on. And so what we did is we walked up and down the street with a map of the houses on the street, and we just drew a little sketch on the lot of whatever stood out to us from a particular house. And it would be like a character defining element. So when you look at this, what do you see? What stands out? And so we cataloged things like siding. There's tons of siding, just like as a material option. Chimney, no chimney, material transition, window shape, garage doors, ornamentation on the front balcony or the front patio, triangle windows. Oh man, the list goes on and on and on. And so we made these maps, and we color coded them, and I think we had like 6 maps in total. And at this point, we still didn't know what we were doing with the data. So we just were like, we made the maps. We're like roof type. color coded it, saw some trends, right? Like there's tons of hip roofs, tons of hip roofs, materiality, tons of siding. And then these things that we saw like over and over and over again on multiple houses, we began to refer to them as character staples. So they're accepted built form solutions that are very, very common. They're commonalities between a lot of the houses on the street. And then we saw some very, very unique pieces on one, maybe only two houses. So one house has like a ship wheel detail on the front porch, arched windows for an entryway, triangle windows.
Yeah, was it Jack Long's?
Jack Long's,
Yes.
yeah. So I think he was the catalyst, but then all of a sudden, like a couple other houses have
Started
them after.
to take it,
But I've
yeah.
never seen them anywhere else.
Well,
but
that's the evolution of character, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then we're like, okay, so but very unique.
Yeah.
Like we're talking, this is not like a cookie cutter community. Like very unique things I've never seen in my life ever on any street. So those are the character anomalies. And so we decided, well, not we decided, it was just like, it was clear that our development had to have both character staples and character anomalies. So what we did was we created little individual 3D models of all of the pieces represented on like a per capita basis of the street. We color coded them so they're all multicolor to match our maps. And at this point we had developed like the architectural shape, the unit type, the massing on the site, and this is really important that all this can be established before you do the next part. Lot coverage, height, all that had been figured out. But we needed the architecture soup to inform the architectural expression of the project. So what we did was, this was an office like design charrette study. So you take a scoop of the character staples, you take a scoop of the character anomalies, you go away and you apply the architecture to your project.
Cool.
So we did that, and the key point of the anomalies is you actually have to add to the bucket, right? You can't just copy an anomaly that someone else has. Like you have to take it
It's like
and you
creating
have to
something.
add
Yeah,
you
yeah.
have to add your anomaly
I love
to
that.
the bucket. And it's a very, very easy way to explain to people how architects design and how you can design.
Yeah.
And we've had a lot of pushback on the number of units, but not one on the architecture.
Yeah, I love that. It's such a critical function, and I love the approach, and it almost dovetails so nicely with the work that we do in community when we're trying to figure out how to make sure members of the community don't feel like their history, what they know, is being left behind. And I think you did such a good job at paying homage to that, although I know you still got appealed and it didn't.
But it wasn't because of the architecture.
Correct.
It was because of the density.
Which is something we can discuss for another day. But tell us a bit about this project that you're working on, and what HGO even means, and kind of how the site is situated and why it's so unique.
Yeah, so this project is 16 units at stacked towns, so it appears as if it's 8 stacked towns. On the front, it looks like a semi-detached, and on the back, it looks like a garage with 2 suites above. Most of the units are within the belly of the site, and so the site is atypical. It's facing New Street. It's also on the back attached half to a lane and half facing St. Monica Avenue. And it's 66 feet wide and it's 170 feet deep. And so we couldn't make RCG work. We just couldn't. We couldn't unlock the potential of the site with that zoning.
And that's the base zoning now.
That's the base zoning.
Okay.
RCG is the base zoning. So what that resulted in, and I'm sure you've seen it around Calgary or maybe in your city, is 2 4-packs.
Yep.
And really it's not a desirable place to live.
And describe the 4-pack for people.
Okay, so it's 2 semi-detached facing one way, and then it's a mirror on the other.
Yeah.
And then there's basement suites below, or basement units below, and then you just copy and paste it and stick
Yeah.
it on the back.
Yeah. So
But-
two sets of buildings that have
2 sets
8.
of, exactly, that
Yeah.
have 8 dwelling units.
Yeah.
And so the problem with that is, if you're watching, just quickly draw that out. You can see where you get windows. on each of these dwelling units, you only get major windows on one side of the facade, because on the side yards, you can't, for building code reasons, have large windows. Plus, you just like look into your neighbor's house. So what we have are all through units. So we've rotated our units and they go side to side in the lot. So our lot is orientated north-south and these ones go east-west.
Okay.
So each of the units has 2 full sides of glazing, which means like a single bedroom, a 1-bedroom dwelling unit in the basement. It's not just one window. It's like you have a window for your bedroom and then you have a window for your living space.
Yeah.
And it's way better. It's way nicer. It's a much nicer solution. And we just couldn't achieve that with RCG because you can't, the rules are so, I guess, quite limited with what you can do. And they really, RCG wasn't designed for a 66 by 170.
Normal.
No.
Nature of your lot. And
Yeah.
so you went through this journey. This is a personal project. You've put a ton of effort and you're like very close. So tell us about the timeline and kind of like what you went through to get to, like how long has this been?
Well, we bought the lot in 2022.
Okay.
And we're 2025.
Yeah.
So we're planning to break ground this season.
Okay.
We have DP approval. We just got our results of our appeal with SDAB. That added about 4 months to our timeline. Lots of money. Yeah, lots of money.
Yeah.
We were permitted use as of right, no relaxations. Unfortunately, still was heard at SDAB. Really unfortunate, really disappointing. Because the thing with permitted use is well, you can't stop it from being built.
Yeah.
You can stall it, but you cannot stop it.
Sure.
So
yeah. What has this journey like told you? I feel like you're passionate, you have a fire in your stomach for like why this housing form matters and why you think it's appropriate. What would you tell other cities or even the city of Calgary as they continue to embark on this? You see the challenges that, council is debating and administration with just trying to make this more approachable. Like with that journey that you went through over 3 years to do everything you possibly could as a professional, embarking on your own project and still facing, quite the battle. Like, why do you think it's so important still? And why would you keep going?
Great question.
Yeah.
I'm also on Council's 2025 Advisory Committee on Housing, so I'm giving advice that way as well, which I think is a really good avenue. But this kind of housing is important because it's located in communities that people want to live, and it's at a scale that is familiar to anyone who's ever lived in a single family house. And it gives people an opportunity to not live in a 6-story or an 8-story or something that maybe isn't as familiar to them, or perhaps they don't like that scale. And so this type of housing, it just nestles in right next to a bunch of single family houses in great communities that there's really good amenities, there's really good transit, there's really good people, there's richness, and there is diversity. We just want more of it.
Yeah.
And I also think that as the community ages, there's going to be people, like what happens if you're an elderly couple and your husband passes away and you can't handle the upkeep of your single family house, but there's nowhere for you to live. So you're forced to leave the community. And if we have housing options like we're providing, you could just move in next door down the street. And that's a real thing that does happen. And if we don't have these housing options for people, then they will leave our community. And actually, I think the conversation is more the characters of our community, not the character. Because if we don't have these housing options, the very characters who've made up our community will leave.
Yeah.
Or be forced to leave, not leave at will, but will be
sure.
forced to leave. And I really don't think that an elderly couple is going to want to live in on High Street in an 8-story apartment building. It's just too unfamiliar at that point.
Yeah, and like the idea of obviously the housing diversity brings different people in our communities, but even this idea of like our communities are changing, and they're going to
Yep.
be changing significantly because those elderly people who have been rooted in these communities, if we want to keep them here,
We want to keep them.
we're going to have to find a way to produce different building forms.
Absolutely. Or what about like a university student who grew up in Inglewood but cannot afford a single family house but really wants to live here?
Yeah, yeah. And so what advice would you give communities that or cities that are on the precipice of these conversations and are nervous about the change or don't know how to do that? Like, how would you, I think in Calgary, we were in this weird state where we saw so much growth. We probably have more missing middle housing examples than anywhere in Canada, if not North America. But it's almost like our policy was behind our growth curve for how well it was working here. And in many other cities, they're just trying to unlock their policy to even allow for that to happen. So what would you tell cities who are, embarking on this for the first time and considering this? What are some of the right steps that you think we could have made as a city had we have had the opportunity to do some of the things that you've talked about with architecture soup and describing the problem? I think is one of the things you do really well. But do you have anything that you would suggest for cities who are thinking about it?
You know what? One of the really nice pieces of feedback that we've got from doing 99 Problems, and anytime we talk about this, is with the graphics that we've made paired with our, I guess it's written content, we did have to write it because some of it is quite technical, is we have a really good way about getting the information to people at the ground floor visually in a way that they can see it and they can be like, oh, that's actually not that bad.
Yeah.
And I hear what you're saying, it's not that bad. But we've given 99 Problems presentation to multiple different groups at the city, and that's been a lot of our feedback, is that you've been able to get this information across to us in a way that we understand. The graphics are clear and they look really nice, and I think there's a lot to that.
Yeah.
And I don't consider it community engagement, but I guess I don't not. But I think that that's key. I think sometimes the graphics, when they're explained maybe just with diagrams or just with words, without compelling visuals and without someone speaking it in plain language, people don't understand it and people don't know what to expect, and they get very, very nervous. It's like they feel like the rug has been pulled out from underneath them. And so I think there has to be work put in at the ground level in that way with those sort of graphics and plain language, explanatory sort of but explain the process in plain language, that I think will go a long way. But I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's
Do you know what
great.
I mean?
I love it.
And we showed our projects, so
Yeah.
they're like, I get that. Well, municipalities can show other architects' projects within their community. I think that that's totally fine, but also think keeping groups small is nice as well.
Yeah.
I also feel like there's a bit of unlocking compassion that needs to happen, and I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
I think about it a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. Do you know what I mean?
No, I totally do. It's like, how do we go back to the human
Yes.
aspect of what we're
Yes.
trying to deliver?
Yes.
Yeah, and I love that this is the work is rooted in that. I think it's important for both sides to come back and recognize that we're trying to create places for people to live. And yes, folks will make money just like any of us do on the work that we do as entrepreneurs or risks that we take, but there's a goal to build better communities, and if that's not everyone's objectives, how do we create the framework and where that's just the outcomes we get?
Yeah, that's just the outcomes we get.
Yeah, cool. Well, I appreciate your time. It's a great conversation. Excited to obviously walk the street with you a little bit here and take a look at some of this stuff and make sure everyone understands the context in which you've painted.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you guys.
Yeah, and love to see your project as it comes to fruition finally.
Me too.
And congrats on that. And yeah, we'll definitely stay in touch and make sure we're sharing that.
Yeah, thank
Cool.
you. Thank you guys.